There's a paragraph I keep finding myself rereading. There's a poetic quality and a truth I know cannot be denied. I'll read it as follows. As she approaches the coast, the high banks that frame the river for most of its length drop away. The Suwannee broadens and slows. It is subject to tidal influence for about 26 miles above the mouth. The river turns brackish about 5 miles before discharging into the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, I'm talking about my sweetheart, beloved, most majestic, natural, near pristine, and wild of any place I've ever experienced. Definitely very up there. The Suwannee River of North Florida. It's beyond words how much she's impacted me in times I felt lost, betrayed, just out of sorts. But she was there to hold me and show me so many things with the jumping sturgeon, with her springs, and just it is beyond words how much variety the upper Suwannee and lower Suwannee differ. So much variety, so much uniqueness. I'm just at a loss for words. I mean, there are comparable rivers, there are similarities in other rivers, don't get me wrong, but there's only one Suwannee. That's for damn sure. And I wouldn't say this if I didn't know it was true. That she hasn't existed since the beginning of time. That there were natural processes, sea level fluctuations over hundreds of thousands of years that led to the creation and formation of the modern Suwannee River. Right? I don't know this just from exploring the Suwannee River. It's also from exploring Central and South Florida, finding fossils, finding how there's less biodiversity, there's less super old, right? Because the Suwannee is obviously an ancient, very special river, very pristine, and the streams and creeks of Central and South Florida, very special in their own right too, are pretty young and sluggish, whereas the Suwannee, while she appears sluggish, is actually pretty swift. Not just in the floodwater stage. If you try, even in the lower Suwannee where she's relatively slow, try paddling upstream, you'll find much more difficulty than paddling downstream. That's for damn sure. I learned from paddling from a riverside resort to one of her larger springs and back. Definitely much easier on the way back. And I could go on about her tributaries, springs, biodiversity, lots of turtles, lots of fish. But that's another talk for another time. This might be one of the more crucial, important talks of my life. And I know the chances of me being misunderstood are exponentially high. I may not convince everybody. That's okay. I can only do my best and let the worries melt away as I passionately, voluntarily share this truth that we think we're the pinnacle of evolution, creation, consciousness. But in reality, we're just a speck. We're just one point in time, one little speck of sand or dust in a field of lots of sand, lots of dirt. And we'll return when we inevitably meet our demise, naturally or unnaturally as it may seem. It's inevitable. We try to escape. We try to say, no, that's bad. That is supposed to happen another time. Not, we try to escape and run away from it as much as possible, but it's a fact of life. One day, living will end. And I'm not saying to chase it, to run towards it. That's not the point. The point is that it's very taboo. Whereas death is just natural. Right? We wouldn't be the person we are, or even be born at all, arguably, if it wasn't for loads and loads of death in nature. Whole species going extinct for us to flourish. And the evidence is all over the place in nature for any species and any individual, whether we want to recognize it or not. Damn, I just talked for 6 minutes straight. Finally taking my first break. You can see how passionate I am about this. I'm excited. I don't know how long this will be, but this will be a good one. Oh yeah. Of course, you might be thinking, what the heck is this guy going on about? Why is he focusing on the dark instead of the light? And I get that. But the way I see it, I was walking through the dark, and maybe largely still am, because, we tend to see what we expect and focus on. We never see the full picture of reality anyways, because we can only see so many wavelengths of light and only hear so many frequencies of sound. So we don't really see reality as it is. We don't see microbes, but that's okay, because the spiritual picture we tend to get is usually enough and very fulfilling. So I will, for all intents and purposes, I will consider that the practical reality. Okay? I'm not saying it's the absolute reality, but it's good enough. So, if you're looking at reality, and this is kind of a metaphor, and say you're living life and you only notice yellow flowers, okay? That's good and fine and dandy, and you keep being in nature. And what if you start noticing red flowers? Not only that, you notice that society doesn't want to focus on the red flowers, but it is more fulfilling to look at the big picture and see all the wide spectrum of all the flavors and all the colors. So obviously, I'm going to be as objective as possible and try to convey that there's more to life than just living, because it's part of the cycle of life, not just of studying nutrient cycling. That's very important, don't get me wrong, but death provides habitat, provides opportunity. If we lived forever in some form or another, we would get absolutely miserable, right? If we lived to infinity and beyond, whatever that means or entails, that means I would have to see my Swanee River go under the sea, which I might anyways during my lifetime, unfortunately, with sea level rise. But for all intents and purposes, let's assume under natural conditions, the Swanee River as it exists will pretty much remain stable my whole life, my whole little snapshot of existence, as far as I know for sure. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with living and dying and never, for the most part, leaving Florida, Georgia, Southeast USA. I'm okay with that. I've left a little bit, explored some Rocky Mountains. It was okay. It's very spiritually different. It's not for everybody, man. This whole, I have to travel, go to another country, go to somewhere completely foreign. I get it, but it's not for everybody. Okay. So, big picture. Man, it's just like you keep living, you see the sunshine in the darkness, but then in a way you see that darkness is also light, right? Because death is not the opposite of life. They're very interwoven and part of the same fabric. The opposite of life is not death. The opposite of life is to have never existed. Right? I know I'm definitely not having offspring. I have more than enough problems, more than enough struggles of existence. And it's just overall a no-go. I don't see any upsides. The way society's going, the way I am with my anger, and I just don't have the patience. And that's okay. I'd much rather be a misunderstood, overlooked wild card than a complete absolute failure and definite villain if I did try to fit the wrong mold. But anyways, back on life and death. So, nutrient cycling is very important, of course. We think death, that's the end. You're gone. Your history. But under natural circumstances, it takes time for your body to break down. Other organisms are going to consume them, even if it's mostly microbes. Assuming you're in a swamp or somewhere low oxygen, remote, Of course, vultures are also an option, I guess. They're kind of taboo and kind of vilified, maybe unjustly. They're very much needed and an integral, overlooked part of the ecosystem. Even when I'm out in nature, I only see mostly a bunch of vultures. Like, ugh. Out of all the birds I could have seen, I just see vultures, but they're very, very unique, essential, not only just interesting birds in general in their own right, but especially for their ecosystem functions of nutrient recycling. And to think they're one of the only obligate scavengers out in nature anywhere. It's a testament to how successful they are. But, yeah. But back on the point of there has to be death and extinctions for new species to arise. Whereas I see this as common sense. Maybe it isn't, because we take for granted that dinosaurs existed and reigned and ruled. We assume that they did so because they were created that way. They just are the best under normal circumstances, right? Out of the past, 250 million years? Most of that time was ruled by giant reptiles. I know it's quite a statement, but talking even bigger picture, most of the history of multicellular organisms, most of them were pretty weird, mostly in the ocean before the dinosaur, really. But that's definitely deserving of its own talk in its own right, the Paleozoic era. I know there's a bunch of lectures, and it's definitely gotten a lot of attention and light that it deserves. Especially with PBS eons, and I remember learning about the Permian and all those unique organisms in college. I'm like, oh my goodness, like it isn't just dinosaurs. There's a lot of interesting overlooked animals, like sleepers, basically. Not just Dimetrodon and trilobites, but there's a whole range. Anyways, talking about big spiritual picture. As much as I want to say that sharks were inevitable to exist, they're the greatest thing ever, modern highly predatory sharks that basically have existed for the past 100 million years, they clearly have not existed since the beginning of time. Before them, the oceans were ruled by giant marine reptiles, believe it or not. It feels weird to say that because it's so out of my spiritual bounds. I barely even think about them, but I know it's true. The Jurassic, one of the peak deadliest times and most biodiverse of the Mesozoic, during the reign of the dinosaurs, mostly ruled by giant reptiles, pliosaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, basically reptiles that resemble dolphins, although they came first, so maybe it's more just to say dolphins resemble ichthyosaurs. But something happened with the environment where they just died off. All the ichthyosaurs, or the vast majority of the pliosaurs and plesiosaurs, they're way past their heyday. Something happened, they died out, and that opened up niches for the modern sharks to evolve and reign and thrive. And later on, the mosasaurs, the giant sea lizards, yeah, they're actually squamates. They were squamates, so basically big giant sea lizards. And you had a completely different, in a way, marine ecosystem, all because of extinction and death, right? As much as I want to say that modern sharks outcompeted the marine reptiles, I can't say that. And I'm pretty sure I touched upon that in my very first Elasmobronch Evolution podcast. Yeah, I had to have at least a little bit, but I can't say that. And same with the middle and end Eocene extinctions. Something happened, bad environmental conditions. A lot of species died out. Some survivors of it, obviously, but ultimately, what tends to live and die on a major scale has highly to do with environmental conditions, and not just what's the biggest, baddest, and strongest, but the most lucky, the most adaptable. It's a big gray spectrum. It's not just, oh, humans are the best, that's why they're clearly alive right now. Our species is not going to last forever. That's a given fact. Most species only last 1 or 2 million years, if that. Right? A little bit longer for marine species because they tend to have a bigger range and less isolated populations, right? Local extinctions don't affect marine species as much because they're more widespread. And we're just as dependent on the environment and the energy from the sun, clean water, shelter, etc., as much as any other animal, even if it's super artificial and it feels like a given, that because we're so successful, because we so effortlessly thrive, seemingly, will last forever. But that's very, very far from the truth. We're just as dependent on the environment as any wild species. I know that for a fact. It doesn't feel like it, but it doesn't change the fact we're just as dependent on abiotic factors as much as any animal. Oh yeah. So of course the question naturally arises, why do I think death is so much everywhere in nature? What the heck is this guy talking about? He's sitting in a shelter indoors with a headset on, just saying whatever he feels like. You can believe that, but trust me, I have been out in nature for hours and hours, and death, as much as people don't think it's everywhere in nature, it is. Walk anywhere in the woods, you're going to come across a fallen tree, a dead animal eventually. Probably smell really bad, but bones, skulls. I've seen a lot. Haven't seen a dead person lately, or ever, thankfully. But especially going down rivers, you're going to find a lot of downed trees. Most any river. Right? And that's not a waste of nature. That's just nature being nature. Whether it's a storm that knocked it over, loose soil, flooding, rot, who knows? Although cypress trees are really rot resistant. They're not resistant to fire, of course. That's more pine trees, because they're used to fire regularly when there's droughts and it gets really dry. But clearly, you'll find dead cypresses and pines anywhere in the woods. Usually fungi breaking it down, which I think that's really interesting and overlooked. The importance of fungi in nature, right? Because we're actually much more closely related to fungi than fungi are to plants, right? That's just how evolution worked. And I'm not saying we have to study invertebrates and study invertebrates in super in depth to see the big picture, but in a way they are integral, because They help with nutrient cycling, with getting energy from the sun. The vast majority of the biomass in the oceans are plankton, right? They're very essential, as are plants in most any ecosystem. That's where you get energy from the sun, right? I'm not talking about deep down depths and caves and the abysmal zone in the ocean. Who knows where energy comes from there? I mean, I know in the deep ocean it comes from actually a lot from death, right? A dead whale will sink to the bottom of the ocean, provide a lot of energy, a lot of habitat for a vast majority of animals. I highly recommend. It seems dark and unwarranted, but the scavenging of a whale. Like, there's so many organisms that uses a dead whale. It's crazy. You wouldn't expect. Sharks, eels, all kinds of fish. They just go nuts over those. So kind of bums me out how I don't even know if I want to say it because it's kind of taboo. We just burn and waste our energy when we die. Why can't we return that from nature? How much we've taken from nature unnaturally, especially, and driven cars, and I don't know. I don't really care when I die because I'm not going to be here to judge, but if I had the choice, I'd probably just bury me in the backyard. It's much cheaper, much more natural, but I know whoever's around is going to do what they think is best, I suppose. Probably, hopefully, buy a coffin that's not too expensive. I don't need the Mercedes. Yeah. I think for sure, we take for granted how much we get shelter from nature, whether it's storms. How many, just your typical average summer storm, there's a lot of death that happens. There has to be. Birds, mammals, insects. We think, oh, it's raining, I'm just going to go inside and just, oh no, I'm in a bad mood now because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Like, you're surviving. Like, you should be thankful. You should be praising nature because you're getting more rainfall, recharging the aquifer, ocean, or not so much the ocean, recharging the rivers, the aquifer, etc., and your survival is pretty much given, but for a vast majority of nature, not so much. Just an interesting, thought-provoking thought, I think. Oh yeah. But if you don't understand yet that death is integral for life to go on, I understand that. It's a hard concept to accept and handle sometimes, but just think, what good is a living tree to a turtle who needs to prop up on something to warm its shell in order to have enough energy, warmth to hunt fish, right? They can try to climb up still living trees, and maybe that works sometimes, but the vast majority of the time, especially going down the Ichetucknee spring run / river of sorts and Santa Fe River fairly recently, they love the fallen, dead logs, former trees, right? It's essential habitat for them. They thrive in it. And not to mention that, just in general, this is hard to accept, I suppose, that even the human species, you look at the big picture, we're not just taking it slow and easy our whole lifetime. We peak fairly young in order to have max reproductive success. That's what worked in our evolutionary past, right? The individuals that became super strong, super attractive in their peak, they took advantage of that, reproduced as much as possible, right? We want to think that monogamy is the only way, but I know that's definitely not the case. I'm not talking about morality here. Who's to say what's more just or right than others? But I'm just saying, in the deep evolutionary past, Monogamy was not the rule for the most successful males. You wanted to spread your genes far and wide, and that is definitely rampant in our evolutionary history. Not saying it's right, I'm just saying that's a fact. And just look at the big picture that our strength, sexual desires, peripheral vision, senses, etc., peak around the 20s to early or so 30s. And that's where I'm not saying reproducing is the purpose of life. Who's to say, especially in this super complicated, unnatural human Anthropocene, it's kind of a free-for-all at this point. A little bit of productive chaos is definitely a good mix of pace versus, the typical American dream. That gets boring, If everybody tried the same thing and black and white, you're either a success or a failure, like who's to say really? At the end of the day, it's all just a big game. But anyways, back on life and death. So hopefully I've shown that by now, that life needs death, death needs life. Because if organisms that were old, worn out, didn't die, they're just holding up, territory, space. I'm saying in natural ecosystems where there's limited resources, limited space, they're going to get pushed out, right? The young and vicious will push them out, if not more aggressive ends to means. Look at lions. Okay, it's pretty brutal that obviously male lions don't do much hunting. It's mostly the female lions. So when the male lions are young and fit and they can hold their own in their territory, they don't have to worry about much. But when the younger, they grow old and weak, they'll get pushed out by the younger males who are in their peak. And it's sad, arguably, but it's just a fact of nature. And that's what, if we study nature and learn from it, we can learn how to make our own species last millions of years. I kind of doubt it at this point, honestly. We just keep on trying to escape nature and have max success for as unsustainable as it is. But I'm not going to get into that. Those gray areas, already, the topic at hand is already pretty grayish. Yeah, I don't want to drag this out too much. Let me think about if there's anything else I could share. Really maximize the big picture insights. And if I had to make a part 2, if somebody is asking a major question, or if I have to research something, because obviously I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. Yeah, so wrapping up here. Of course, open for questions, comments, anything and everything. Like, bring it on, not in a challenging way, but in an accepting way. And I know I tend to, on YouTube comment land, babble, but I know I've definitely do stupid things in nature sometimes. Maybe a little bit unnecessarily dangerous, but I think it is important to live and push the boundaries sometimes, because if we're always afraid of death, like it's just the final unjust, unnatural ending point, then we can't appreciate living, right? If we try to stay as far away from death as much as possible and do everything because we're afraid of it, then we can't live, right? I'd much rather live and have a complete crap ending than not have lived at all and have a super, that made sense, he died of cancer at 95. But if I lived a boring life, not full of adventure and what I enjoy doing, then what was the sense? Where was the fun? There's a lot of gray areas, but that's okay because we're just doing our best for the knowledge we know, for all we've been through. And I've definitely had an interesting emotional roller coaster ride life. And I know it doesn't end, the torture never ends. Sometimes it feels a little bit too long, but it's okay. I just keep on smiling, keep on showing how nature is full of so many lessons. And I love it, and I live for it. Not just because there are certain figures who I still look up to and admire, especially the late, great Steve Irwin. You have to admit, even if you're not into nature that much and crocodiles and snakes, his energy is just infectious in a good way, right? You're just like, oh my goodness, I don't really understand these scaly, cold-blooded things, maybe, but you can tell he knows that they're larger than life, and we can learn a lot from them and appreciate and respect them. We don't have to necessarily appreciate and find them super interesting, but definitely I think he brought respect to the field of protecting these very misunderstood, easy to demonize, easy to say these things are not like the cute and cuddly, furry, teddy bears and koala bears, but they have a right to exist as much as any animal. And if I can, I'm getting emotional. If I can show at least half of that passion and get that across to somebody about my beloved sharks and Gulf sturgeon, then I've considered my life a success, right? Because it's not all about me. I'm just a speck in time. I'm going to leave this planet one day, and there's no sense to it unless, so it seems, I stand for something. And I'm definitely passionate and interested in nature and her wildness, lessons, uniqueness. And I want to show that. And I know I can only convey so much through this medium. You really have to explore nature, not just look at symbols and pictures. And man, you just have to say, there's no eventually, there's only now. And right now, I want to explore this new stretch of a river or this new section of Florida or wherever you are, right? No, don't listen to somebody who says, oh, you have to go to this place in order to live. You have to go to the Grand Canyon. You have to go to this national park or state park. Just appreciate it from the bottom up. Just the fact that you have time and you have the sense to appreciate anything in nature makes you awesome, right? Even if it's something common. If you look at a common snake, a common songbird, you find beauty in it. That's what life is about. Whatever helps you live peacefully and in harmony with nature is worth it. And it doesn't have to be the biggest, most impressive, most noteworthy, right? Because if you depend on other people for validation, as I've said before, it's a worry and an expectation. And you can't expect to thrive in life depending on worries and expectations. You can only live very successfully and resiliently being self-sufficient and living from the bottom up. That's just, I know, is the truth. And I love my alligators, sturgeon, sharks, snakes. I love it all in Florida. Definitely recommend appreciating anything in nature you can get. And you don't have to harm it necessarily. Just make sure it's sustainable. Make sure you're safe. What you're doing it fairly safely. And yeah, just look at the big picture. Follow the laws. Assuming they're still just and sustainable in the future. Just keep living your life. Because life is about living, laughing, and loving. no matter how you can find it. Some people find it in the typical American dream, some people find it out in nature. And that's okay. There can be gray areas, there can be overlap and divisions in between family members. You prefer one thing, I prefer another thing. We don't have to show it how it affects other people, how it affects ourselves to feel validated, right? We know our truth. We know deep inside what's going on. Our passions are validated, and that's all we can do. Just keep on living, laughing, and loving. Yeah, I think that's a good note to end it. Yep. So thanks a bunch for listening. This was a pretty emotional, fun, taboo, fulfilling subject all in one. Ooh, I think this is definitely one of the grander ones, but I'll let you guys be the judge. Oh yeah. All right. Thanks for listening. Until next time. Peace out.